On an exciting day at the Epsom Derby, a woman was standing in the crowds with a plan ready to execute. Mixed in with the roaring congregation, Emily Davison didn't stand out and seemed like any other person in the crowd. No one could have known how the afternoon would play out. At 3:01 p.m, the derby commenced and the horses began thundering down the track. Once the first main bulk of horses passed the bend Emily was standing at, she slipped under the safety rail and walked onto the track. And as the king's horse came galloping round the bend, it knocked Emily to the floor, causing her to lose consciousness. Today, we're looking at the mysterious death of Emily Davison and discussing whether this was a planned sacrifice or simply a protest gone wrong. Before we get into this video, as always, just a reminder to like and subscribe if you do enjoy my content. I make videos on true crime, mysteries and the paranormal, so if that sounds right up your street, then please do join the community. Let's get back into it. In the early 1900s, women in Britain still had no right to vote in parliamentary elections. Politics, law and power were overwhelmingly controlled by men, and many women had spent decades campaigning peacefully for change with little success. By the beginning of the 20th century, frustration was growing. Some campaigners began to feel that polite petitions and speeches simply weren't working. The government continued to ignore them, delay reform, or dismiss the movement entirely. That frustration helped give rise to the Women's Social and Political Union, also known as the WSPU, founded by Emmeline Pankhurst in 1903. The organisation became famous for its slogan, "Deeds, not words." And unlike earlier suffrage groups, the WSPU embraced direct action and disruption. Their goal was to make the issue impossible to ignore. As the years went on, tactics became increasingly militant. The suffragettes interrupted political meetings, chained themselves to railings, smashed windows, damaged property, and set fire to buildings. Many members were arrested repeatedly, including Emily Davison herself. Inside prison, their protests didn't cease. Many began hunger strikes in reaction to their treatment and demanded recognition as political prisoners rather than ordinary criminals. The government responded with force feeding, a brutal process where tubes were forced into the prisoners' noses or throats to keep them alive. Many women described the experience as painful, humiliating, and traumatic. The practice unsurprisingly shocked the public and became deeply controversial. So, one of the most important things to understand about Emily Davison is that she wasn't an unstable outsider or someone acting on impulse. She was highly educated, intelligent, and deeply politically engaged at a time when women were rarely encouraged to enter public or academic life. Davison studied at Royal Holloway, University of London, and later University of Oxford, where she studied English literature. But despite her academic ability, like most women of the time, her opportunities were still heavily restricted, simply because she was female. Women could study, but they could not participate equally in political life, and many professions remained closed to them. And it was this sense of inequality that became central to Davison's identity. She joined the Women's Social and Political Union and quickly became known one of its most committed members. Unlike some supporters who limited themselves to speeches or peaceful demonstrations, Davison believed that stronger action was necessary. She repeatedly placed herself in dangerous situations to draw attention to the cause, and over the years was arrested multiple times for her involvement. While imprisoned, Davison also took part in hunger strikes, refusing food to protest the treatment of suffragettes and to demand recognition as political prisoners. The government, as we said earlier, responded with force feeding. Davison endured this repeatedly, and some historians believe these experiences hardened her politically and psychologically. Over time, her protests appeared to become more extreme, confrontational, and physically risky, and at one point she reportedly threw herself down a prison staircase. There is debate over whether this was a suicide attempt or another form of protest, but it demonstrated how far she was willing to go. By this point, activism was no longer just something Davison supported. It had become a deeply emotional and personal part of her identity. She believed the government was willing to ignore women indefinitely unless the movement forced the public to pay attention. So when she stepped onto that racetrack, she wasn't acting as a random bystander or someone seeking chaos. She was someone who had spent years sacrificing her body, freedom, and safety for a political cause. Now let's get into the horrific events of that day. The 4th of June 1913 was a cloudy but bright average early summer day in England. 500,000 people were enjoying themselves at the Epsom Derby, an atmosphere that combined high society prestige with gritty working class entertainment. At one end of the crowd sat King George V and Queen Mary, and at the other, working class families who were enjoying the festivities, including children dressed as pearly kings and queens. The mood was one of excitement and competition, with men boxing in front of cheering crowds and other people swarming the bookie stalls scattered across the grandstand. The main event of the day, the Derby, began at 3:01 p.m. 15 horses started the race, and for the first minute and a half, it was a standard high-speed gallop. The horses thundered along the straight and began the gradual turn toward the final bend. As the horses approached, Emily was positioned at the inner rail of Tattenham Corner, a sharp downhill bend where the crowd was thickest and the newsreel cameras were rolling. 9 horses galloped past at full speed, and there was a small gap of a few yards after the 9th horse. Emily slipped under the protecting rail and walked onto the track. She first moved toward a horse named Agadir, but stepped aside. 2 more horses passed, and then came Anma, the king's horse, running third from last. As Anma thundered around the corner at roughly 35 miles per hour, Emily reached up for the horse's bridle, perhaps to attach a suffragette scarf to the animal. But within 4 seconds of stepping onto the track, the horse struck her with great force, somersaulting over its jockey and knocking Emily unconscious. And all of this was caught on camera. Emily was rushed to Epsom Cottage Hospital, where she died 4 days later without ever waking up. One moment turned Emily Davison into a symbol, but more than a century later, we still don't fully know why she stepped in front of that horse. So, did Emily Davison intend to die that day? This is the question that has followed her death for more than a century. Was this a deliberate act of martyrdom, a protest that went horribly wrong, or something in between? And the thing is, we can never truly know what was in her mind as she stepped out onto that track. There are several details that suggest Davison may not have intended to die that day. One of the most commonly discussed pieces of evidence is that she reportedly bought a return train ticket before travelling to the Derby, which implies that she intended to go home afterwards. There's also evidence of future plans and ongoing involvement in the suffragette movement, which again suggests that she didn't plan to end her protesting that day. Most importantly though, modern analysis of the footage suggests that she may have been attempting to attach a suffragette scarf or banner to the king's horse, like we said earlier, rather than trying to throw herself directly in front of it. And if that is true, then the act may have been intended as purely symbolic and attention-grabbing, rather than fatal. Now let's look at some of the elements that point towards her knowingly giving up her life. It is impossible to ignore how dangerous the act was. Davison was intelligent and politically experienced. She understood the speed and force of a racehorse, and by this time she had already demonstrated a willingness to risk serious injury for the movement. This was someone who endured force-feeding, faced repeated imprisonment, and carried out increasingly extreme acts of protest. She also understood the power of spectacle. The suffragette movement relied heavily on visibility and public attention, and a dramatic act at one of Britain's most famous public events guaranteed headlines across the country. Honestly, I have so much respect for this woman. I have so much respect. Some historians believe Davison may have been prepared to die if necessary, even if death wasn't her main goal, but just a result of getting that scarf on the horse. And maybe that's it. Perhaps Emily knew about the risk, but wanted that disruption and symbolic confrontation, so she weighed up the risk and the reward. And this risk was her death. The death of Emily Davison sent shockwaves across Britain. Newspapers across Britain quickly published dramatic headlines and images of the collision. For many people, the event was horrifying. Some saw Davison as reckless or dangerous, but others viewed her as a courageous and deeply committed woman in the fight for women's suffrage. Almost immediately, her death became political. The suffragette movement naturally transformed the tragedy into a symbol of sacrifice and resistance. Her funeral procession in London became a massive public event organised by the Women's Social and Political Union. thousands of women marched in white clothing behind her coffin, carrying banners and suffragette colours through the streets, and crowds gathered to watch as the procession moved through the city. The imagery was deliberate, solemn, powerful, commercial. Emily had to be remembered not simply as a victim, but as someone who had given everything for the cause. And in many ways, this is where the mystery deepens, because after her death, Emily stopped being viewed only as a person. She rightly became a symbol, a martyr, and a political figure who was larger than the event itself. Over time, the meaning of her death became shaped not only by what happened on the racetrack, but by how people chose to remember it. The lack of conclusion to her actions meant that people could choose their own narrative, and it's also why we're still questioning her intentions to this day. Emily's death didn't end the conversation of equal rights, it transformed it. There is a real habit of humanity trying to put people and events into boxes so we can make sense of their choices and almost label them as one thing. But as a historian, I can say that it doesn't work that way. People of the past had multiple motives for their actions like we do today, so real moments are often more uncertain than we like to conclude them to be. And in instances like this, a single moment can become so symbolic that the truth inside it becomes harder to see. Whether Emily Davison intended to give up her life that summer day, this doesn't change the revolution it ramped up. As a woman and a man, you can look back at this event and feel a strong sense of gratitude and sadness, because society forced someone to be okay with that risk. And this goes for all the decisions that the incredible women of the suffragette movement had to make. It's a clear reflection of society itself and the desperation it instilled into women at the time. And that is it for the shocking and sad death of Emily Davison. Please let me know your thoughts on this one, because it's just so important, because it's literally changed history. But thank you ever so much for watching, guys, and I will see you in my next one.